Welcome to day 13 of Shadowhunters month. Unlucky for some, 13, but probably lucky for a lot of people today, because this is another Why I Love video, and this time I will be talking about Malec, which, if you know of Shadowhunters, maybe even if you haven't heard of Shadowhunters, I have a feeling you might have heard of Malec and who they are. So this one's interesting because obviously it's one of the biggest couples in Shadowhunters, and they've appeared in both books and TV shows, so I can kind of analyse them across different mediums, which I couldn't really do with Mark and Christina, or Tessa, Wood and Jem. Although they are quite, not differently presented I suppose, they get a lot more focus in the show than they ever did in the books. You know, the show has kind of given them different storylines in the books, to the books even. You know, for example, in the fourth Mortal Instruments book, Magnus and Malec are travelling together in a way, and not actually in most of the book. Whereas instead they kind of gave them different storylines in the show instead, to keep them around. So it's interesting how they've kind of been presented differently. But you know, the core things about the characters and their relationships still pretty much the same. But yeah, without a doubt, probably the most popular couple on Shadowhunters. And I really love both the characters a lot, and I really liked seeing their relationship grow and develop, because, you know, it's a very unique kind of romance between the two of them. You know, it's not every day you'll read a romance between, like, an 18-year-old guy and you know, centuries-old warlock, you know. So I just think, right from the off, really, it's an extraordinary thing, and just so brilliantly kind of written, and two very opposite characters to each other almost, and it's the whole opposites attract thing, and it just works so well. The chemistry between the characters is incredible, and on the show, the chemistry between Matthew Daddario and Harry Shum Jr. also really, really helps, because, you know, there's a lot of chemistry there with them. But before I get more into them together, talk about them as individuals, I love Magnus, because he's almost the heart of Shadowhunters. He's appeared in basically every book, I think, and he has so many deep ties and connections to, you know, the Mortal Instruments characters, the Infernal Devices characters, and in that sense he is kind of the core and the foundation of this whole kind of Shadowhunters verse, and I really love how he presents himself, the extravagance behind him, right from the off when he's first introduced in City of Bones. You just get a sense of the flair and the confidence he has, and even if he doesn't fully accept who he is, or parts of him, he knows who he is, and he's not afraid to show that, which I really like. And right from the off, you know, he just made this instant impression, and you're like, whoa, who's this guy, what's his deal? And you kind of almost desperately want to learn more about him right from the moment he's introduced. I think it's like chapter 11 or something for City of Bones. And so, you know, from the outside and visually, he's a very kind of interesting character, because he has a very unique sense of style and stuff like that. But then you learn a bit more about him and his past and who he is and stuff, and you realise there's a lot of tragedy in his life. You know, he's fallen in love and watched those people grow old and die, and he's had to move on from his family, his mother. He's watched friends and loved ones, you know, grow old and die without him, as he's just stayed looking the same. Centuries have passed, and, you know, God knows how many goodbyes he's had to say, and all that pain he's had to endure from losing the people he loved, which is kind of why he distanced himself from love for a little while until he met Alec, which is another reason I really love them together, because Alec kind of reawoke that ability to love in Magnus, which he was getting close to losing, so I really love that. And the thing about Magnus is he's always often willing to help people, maybe for a price, maybe not. And despite everything that he's gone through, and these hundreds and hundreds of years he's spent, losing people and having horrible things happen to him, he hasn't let the world turn him cruel. And I think that's a really admirable thing and an incredible trait for him, and it shows a lot of strength and resilience to the person he is. And God knows who Magnus was when he was like 20 years old or something, because obviously we've known him centuries later. But I think it's just such an interesting idea for a character, and you could have easily made him like villainous, but instead, Cassandra Clare kind of chose to have him almost channel his pain in different ways, and like being a party animal or giving his heart to people, So I thought that was really kind of interesting. And then for Alec, I think he has a very important story, in terms of his whole kind of accepting he's gay and coming out and everything like that. You kind of root for him to get past his struggle, and Magnus really helps him with that, which is another reason I really love them together. And when we first meet Alec in the books and the show, he's very kind of shut off, and he's like, I like Izzy, I like Jace, I maybe am in love with Jace. Anyone else? No thanks. He kind of pushed people away, and he was quite rude and mean to a lot of people. But through the process of him kind of understanding himself and coming to terms with who he is, and through Magnus as well, he learned to open himself up to people, which allowed him to establish his really special kind of connections with Clary, and Simon, and his characters who he really did not start off on good terms with. And he kind of really turned that around to create some really special bonds, like in the show when Clary's struggling over Jace being the owl and everything, and Alec gives her a hug. And can you imagine him trying to do that in season 1? It's like the character growth that he's shown, and Matthew Dai's performance really helps to kind of solidify why I love these characters so much. And also the thing with Alec is when he does love someone, he loves them fiercely and ferociously, which may be to his detriment at times. Like the whole... we've seen a bit of it in the show with him kind of struggling with the fact that Magnus had been with other people, and kept like trinkets to remind himself of them, and the fact that he'd grow old and die when Magnus would just carry on living without him and maybe eventually find someone else. And in the books we had a whole lot of mess with that kind of story as well, which I won't delve into too much in case of spoilers. But they get to a lot of struggles when Alec's trying to figure out how he feels about that and the inevitability that he won't be around forever, and Magnus will have to find someone else and move on, and hopefully never forget him. And with Jace, the whole power tie thing, he obviously is very loyal to him and loves him fiercely. Isabel, his family, Max, Maris, he loves the Lightwoods quite fiercely as well. And that can be a sign of weakness, it can be a sign of strength. But that, unwavering loyalty and love is, for me, a character trait I really admire, and something I really like about Alec. So in terms of individuals, I feel like they definitely started out being quite different. Alec was kind of almost introverted and kept himself to himself, whereas Magnus was very much the life and soul of the party. And then as they kind of fell in love with each other and negotiated, new people almost to become, or true selves. So yeah, the opposites attract thing is kind of the classic thing, and I really like that they did that with two male characters. 'Cause obviously a lot of media and a lot of representation is just boy meets girl, girl meets boy kind of romance, but Cassandra Clare kind of made this gay couple and made sure that they were fleshed out as characters and as lovers, just as any, you know, heterosexual relationship would be, which I don't think you'd always get. A lot of the time, you know, gay characters you see in media are like the side characters, like Kevin in Riverdale, for example, and they don't get a lot of the focus, or sometimes they're just played for comedy, and they might have these perfect relationships and they're not portrayed as like flawed characters and real people, but Magnus and Alec are very much portrayed in that way, which I really like, and it makes sense because Alec's still very young when he first meets Magnus, and you'd think Magnus would have everything figured out after living for centuries, but that's just not how it is. You know, you literally learn something new every day, and Magnus is obviously a very wise and very knowledgeable person, but every single relationship he'd ever have is different, so he still had to kind of work out how to negotiate a relationship with Alec. I think there's a lot of passion in their relationship. It's a very passionate love between them both. They very much kind of grew together and grew into each other in a really nice way. I like the kind of parallel or mirror, I suppose, in that this is, you know, Magnus's God knows how many relationships he's had, and this is like his next one, if you will. He's been with a lot of people, whereas with Alec, Magnus is, you know, the first boyfriend he's ever had, the first guy he's ever kissed, the first person he's ever kind of been with. So that kind of distinction between them two as well is very interesting, and I like how, especially in the show, they very tentatively manage that and negotiate that. And they're very good at communication, I think. You know, in Tales from the Shadowhunters Academy, when they have the whole thing with baby Max, and, you know, people assumed that they were going to keep the baby when it was discovered, and they kind of had to talk things through about whether they wanted to commit to that, and were they ready to be kind of a family and raise a child together. And in the show, you know, when they first kind of were getting together and trying to work out if it was going to work with them, they had a couple of spats, and Alec wasn't really sure what he was doing, and he knew relationships were a lot of hard work, and they were kind of having to talk things through and all those problems. Like when Magnus was kind of in Valentine's body for a bit and had all these flashbacks to what happened to his mother and everything, and his stepfather. He was struggling to kind of deal with like the monster inside of him, if you will. And Alec really helped him through that once Magnus opened up to him about, you know, the struggles he was going through. So there's a lot of kind of communication between them, and I think that's something, once they kind of properly got together and got over all those hurdles, they've always been very good at kind of telling each other how they're feeling and being honest and open with each other, which is very healthy. And I love how healthy that relationship is portrayed, and I love that they're comfortable enough to kind of communicate with each other that way. There's a lot of trust in their relationship. But alongside the communication stuff, there's a lot of complexities, like Alec's kind of complex with eventually dying one day while Magnus lives forever, and the kind of arguments and tension that causes between them, and that, especially in the books, causes Alec to make a lot of mistakes. I mean, you can argue if they're mistakes or not, you know, but it shows that he's flawed, and Magnus is flawed and done some things he regrets, but they work through those regrets together, and they kind of patch each other up in a really beautiful way. And they also kind of both give each other acceptance. You know, Magnus kind of helps Alec deal with coming out and realising that he's gay and everything. and in the other way around, Magnus, as he's remembering what he did to his stepfather and what happened to his mother, and like always wanting to kind of hide his, warlock mark in his eyes, whereas Alec thinks they're beautiful, and he kind of helps Magnus accept the monster inside, and kind of tame him in such a beautiful way. And they really do help each other move forward, and let go of things that were holding them back. They really kind of broke each other out of their own personal prisons, which I just think is such an amazing way to portray a relationship. And then, I mean, we can't speak for the show just now, but in terms of like what's going on with them in the books and everything, they're very stable, very happy, and they clearly have a future together, which, now we've got past all the Malec drama for the books, I'm sure, maybe not for the show. They've got kids, they've talked about marriage once Downworlders can marry Shadowhunters in like the proper ceremonies and stuff. And there's definitely a future ahead for them, and all those obstacles they kind of had to get over in their early days together have kind of come and gone, and now they have a family to think about, whereas before it was more so, we had these major villains in our life to deal with, whereas they can kind of ease back on that thing now, and they're getting older, they're very much getting used to being together, and just the thought of everything they've gone through, and the fact that they made it through the other side and they're settled, is such an extraordinary thing when you look back at City of Bones, particularly seeing who Alec used to be and seeing who Magnus was presented as. The fact that they both found such a deep love for each other, and kind of healed each other's hearts, and are now, happy and settled, and hopefully have a long life together, is such an amazing thing. Even if it's bittersweet, because you think, one day Alec's going to die, and Magnus will have to carry on, but he's definitely got his sons that I think are both warlocks, so they'll live forever. At least one of them is. So he's always going to have a piece of Alec with him, which I think is so beautiful. And they're just these two flawed people who learn to accept their flaws through each other. And I think that's beautiful in itself, without the context of knowing that Alec was like this 18-year-old guy who slays demons, and Magnus is an ancient warlock, an ancient bisexual warlock who's had many lovers, and Alec was, hadn't been with anyone before. It's the unlikely love story that was written so beautifully and acted so well on the show as well, and won all these awards for the show and for Matthew and Harry's performances. It's an incredible feat, and the thing with Malec is clearly this couple means so much to so many people and got so many people through tough times, and healed their hearts in the way Magnus and Alec healed each other, and allowed other people to accept who they were, in the same way that Alec had to and Magnus had to an extent as well. So they're very much seared onto the hearts, I think, of most of the Shadowhunters fan base. And long after the books are done, long after the show is done, I think people will look back on Malec as being a very special thing and kind of a breakthrough and a legacy. I think the Malec legacy will be something that lives on forever. And behind such an amazing couple are two, exceptional men, which is quite an accomplishment and quite a feat. And they've just gone on such an incredible journey, both on the show and in the books, and I can't wait to see where it's going to take them in the future. Hopefully it's bright and doesn't break all our hearts. But yeah, Malec is a very special pairing to a lot of people. And you know, whereas I can't relate to like Alec's story or Magnus's story, I can appreciate what they've done for so many people and what they represent, and that's kind of one of the most beautiful things to have come from Shadowhunters, and that's Malec. That's why I love them, that's why God knows how many people around the world love them. It's a very, very special thing, and a very, very special couple. So yeah, that is Malec. Quite something, those two. Hopefully all will be well for them in 3B, in the finale, and any future books. There is a trilogy coming out about them, I think, next year. I think the first one's out. I can't remember what it's called, but I think the first one's definitely about their holiday away, I think, during City of Fallen Angels. So that should be interesting, getting a bit more content with them in their earlier days. So yeah, that is why I love Malec. Let me know your thoughts on them as well, and who your favourite kind of couples are. Because obviously there will be a few more videos like this one coming up, including tomorrow. There's another couple that I'll be talking about, which I'm very hyped for. So yeah, until tomorrow's video, thanks for watching.